Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little more time on. Today, we were planning to talk about Super Saturday, but we have some illnesses on the team, and so we're going to go to a double hour of Q&A. So if you've got questions, we've got a panel. We're ready to answer your questions there. So go ahead and throw those in right now into Makana. And let's go ahead with the first question. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from Julia Meinold in Dortmund, Germany. And Julian says, what software can I use to record a Zoom call and edit it later in Final Cut Pro 10? My guess is to use ZoomIso, but how can I record the different video and audio outputs on the same computer? And thank you.
Go ahead, Bill.
And if you're in Zoom, and I'm not sure if this depends on the level of Zoom you're on or not, but when I do the Final Cut things on Friday, I have taken to just hitting record in the Zoom interface. And to my surprise, the first time I did it on my desktop afterwards were splits as to the recorded channels. So there is a function inside Zoom. Again, I'm not sure if you have to have a particular level of Zoom webinar or something like that for it to work, but it's worked really well and surprisingly good quality on what they returned to me. So that's one way. You can also use Screen Recorder and some other things to do it, but the ISOs, I think one of the easiest ways is to use a ZoomIso recorder that does exports as well, but I'll let somebody else who's more in tune with that
go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, the way that I would look at doing it is with Mimo Live. So with Mimo Live, you can, and a combination of ZoomIso. So ZoomIso would, as long as your co-host would allow you to go in there and grab those feeds. And then in Mimo Live, you can add them as NDI feeds. And then in the output, you can say, just like in this example, you could say file recording, and then video, you would say, you would choose those isolated feeds, and then you can record them individually. This is with Mimo Live 5 and higher that you can record isolated destinations. So it all depends on the speed of your computer and the speed of your drives as to how many feeds that you can pull, and in what codec too. You got to be careful as to what codec that you're choosing, because you can go all the way up to, ProRes 422 or even higher. So it depends on what you want to do.
And some of that's a balance of drive speed as well as processing. So, for instance, ProRes takes less CPU to record, but more drive space more drive speed and more drive space. And so you just have to, if you do H.264, now if you're using one of the newer Macs that are higher end that have their own H.264 or ProRes chips, there's a lot less overhead as well. Then it becomes more of just a speed issue. And Guy, I think, can you use, and I haven't tried this, you can use NDI, but can you also use Siphon? I think you can output it to Siphon.
I haven't tried Siphon. I'm pretty sure you can. But the other way I would do this was with a PC with NDI recorder. So KiloView has something called NDI recorder that's $99. That's the other way that I would do it, is just kick it off to another machine to handle the records.
Yeah, and again, another way to possibly do this is something that's an ISO record ATEM. Being able to put the HDMIs out into that, and then be able to, and then just hit record, and it'll record them all together as well.
Pretty sure that's the way Chris Fenwick does it. Is he uses an ATEM, and then he uses the pluggable device to pull those out. So that might be your least expensive way, and then it's all in sync, and your resolve file's right there. So right when the recording's done, you just open up the resolve file and everything's in sync, and then you can change it around and super source it or do whatever you want.
And one of the things that I'm going to be doing over the next couple of weeks, and it's not going to be, I can't do it at a regular pace, so you're just going to see like a hey everyone in Discord when I'm there, I'm going to be developing kind of my own system. I want to build something in Micro that is just so that I can keep my head around it and play with it myself, is kind of rebuild parts of what we're doing in office hours, but with just an ATEM Extreme SDI and a Duo card or an 8K card or the quad card out, and just play with a simple setup with super sources. But then I'm going to start adding things like Isadora and other things into it slowly in pieces that I can keep my head around, and then and probably work with Elle on some of that as well in some of those sessions. And so stay tuned for that, and I'll let you know, but I can't promise that I'm going to be able to schedule it just because of my day schedule. I'll try to schedule ones that I can, but I kind of want to do it all transparently so we can all kind of do it together. It will happen in the time frames. We're moving, next week we're going to move the ZoomIso testing to 10 to noon instead of what was currently 1 to 3. And the reason that we're doing that is because we had some European partners that are members that couldn't play as easily. So we're going to move it earlier and make it more available for them. And so stay tuned for that. And within those schedules, I'm going to try to get in there and do it and to kind of play with that. And again, remember that starting next week as well, I think we may try it this week, but definitely next week. Anytime we're not using the PCs, we're going to go ahead and push this 12-person conversation into a breakout room and just let it run so that people can use it as a test bed for them to play with ZoomIso. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, looking for a solution for the famous ATEM crushed blacks when using USB. On a PC, I can find the setting in OBS to switch the color range to full versus partial, which fixes it. However, I don't see the option for OBS on Mac. Is using a LUT a suboptimal fix? Yeah,
what's interesting about it is that we don't see the crush when I open up QuickTime to get this out. It seems to be connected. It seems that some apps are using full range and some apps are using partial. It doesn't seem that it is just the ATEM, because when I open up the ATEM output in QuickTime, I think I'm seeing a full, because it looks much more. It has much more dynamic range than what goes into Zoom. So we're still kind of trying to figure this color space issue out. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I'd be concerned if the LUT is post-processing from the ATEM, because if the ATEM's crushing the blacks, you're losing data there if you're going to compensate. I'm
not certain that the ATEM is crushing blacks. Like that's the issue, because when I open it in Omniscope and when I open it in QuickTime, I don't see crushed blacks, and when we open it in Zoom, I do. So I'm not certain that it's based in there. Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, because I can see even the difference. I have my ATEM, both USB ports going into two different computers, two different Macs, as a matter of fact, a Mac Pro and a Mac M1 Mini. And even there, the color space is different between the two Macs. Mm-hmm. So it's not the ATEM. It's something going on inside the operating system and how it's handling. I mean, I can even run QuickTime and I can see the difference on the two machines. Yeah, I can see the difference.
Yeah, so we're still trying to figure that out. I'm not saying that it's one way or the other. I'm just saying I'm not certain, about what's going on. We haven't had time to really dig into figuring it out. Next question.
Next one comes from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. Liberty says, can someone please settle this? What's the best SSD when shooting on a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K Pro?
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I was just going to say it. T5s are very popular, but not available anymore.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, we had a little kerfluffle in the beginning. We all started using T5s because they were out and they worked flawlessly. Everything was just fine. When Samsung moved to a T6, there was a period of time there where they were problematic and it was difficult to get them to record properly. But I have heard since then, I haven't bought any of them and I'm still on the T5s I originally bought, but we heard anecdotal evidence that they had fixed some part of that. And I don't know about anything past that because the T5s are still working flawlessly if you can get them.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Well, if you go out to the Blackmagic support website, they actually have a list that they keep up to date of what works and what doesn't. What works. They don't publish what doesn't work for both SSDs, CF cards, SD cards. They have a very specific list that they know will work with the Blackmagic 6K cameras. And it's out there right now. The current one is out there now.
Hosman?
If you want T5, you can order from South Africa, as many as you need.
If you know somebody in South Africa, you can maybe reach them. We've got a man there.
Yeah, no, I've been using the T5 and independent of the Blackmagic. Just when I'm copying files across, it's just a steady copying rate, transfer rate. I by error ordered the T7 one, same 2 terabyte. And boy, it starts off fantastic and just drops like a brick. And it's very, very slow.
Yeah, both of them will start to degrade at about 400 gigs. But the T7 I think actually starts at more like 200 or 300 gigs that it will start to degrade in speed because of the way it works with cache. The T5 is the most convenient for a lot of us because we bought small rig cages that hold T5s. So they have a T5 slot in them. So a lot of us are kind of stuck with the T5s for a little while. The one that I use with the 12K is the Oyen Helix. We saw this actually at Cinegear, and I ended up buying one. And that's the one that I use that, as well as, this is one that Jason, we got a couple of these SanDisks. These are 2 terabyte SanDisks that we attach. They're not as convenient to grab onto, so that's not the best one from a form factor perspective, but they're very fast and faster than I think that we can get out of the camera. And these ones are, they're pretty useful. And then finally, you can build your own. This is a Neo, INEO, and I build these myself. They're just for cost perspective. I've been testing them. It's a little bit of an art project, but you're buying an SSD. It's an SSD, not an NVMe card. I've tried the wrong one and it doesn't work. This is an NVMe. My other thing is SSD. Anyway, so you got to make sure that you get the right one. No, they're not. They look almost identical. They're not. But you can also build them from NVMEs, and I like this one. This one, from a form factor perspective, is my favorite because it's very rugged, and it's got stuff I can get a hold of for gripping. So whatever kit I'm building, I really like the form factor on this one the best. So I know that didn't answer your question about which one is the best, and I'm afraid that we're going to have to retreat to it depends. Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Canva Create, noon Central, goes live on Zoom with a deep dive into the future of visual communication. They've got a link there. Is Canva a worthwhile tool? Watch party and after hours, perhaps, for the announcement?
Yeah, we're not going to start building lots of watch parties. so it's got to be pretty sizable within a reasonable number of people already using the product before we'll probably do watch parties. And I don't know anybody that uses Canva. So, there might be some people who use, I'm sure it's popular. They've done a lot of things. I think it'd be great if we see something later that is useful, bring it up and let us see it, and maybe we'll learn from that. But I don't think we have a very large user base of Canva within our group. So probably won't do a watch party. Next question.
Mitch Hill, Wilmington, Delaware. When, if ever, will the film industry move away from 24 frames per second?
Oh, Mitchell, I'm not sure if we should talk about religion on this show. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't respond to that. It was an interesting conversation, and I'm glad Courtney's queued up and the raising his hand, because Courtney was recounting some stories of how they were attempting to up the ante as far as frame rates go. So I yield the rest of my time to Courtney because his stories are much more interesting than me babbling on.
And by the way, we'll take time today because we have 2 hours of Q&A. Just a reminder, we weren't able to take on the second hour for this one because we had some sicknesses within the team. And so if you have more questions, go ahead and throw those in because we've got 2 hours to cover, but we're going to be in a relaxed state as we move forward. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, they've looked at higher frame rates, and believe me, they've been tried. ShowScan, of course, was an experimentation in 60 frames per second at 70 millimeter film projected at 60 frames per second, which is high temporal resolution and high visual resolution. And it became so real looking, you kind of look like they've transported the theater to and you're looking at a picture window at people that are performing a play in front of you. It has that level of reality. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, people took it really as a bad thing. It's good if you want to, capitalize on that sensation. But the first time you cut, it becomes discordant, and your body goes, wait a minute, reality just changed. What's going on? I must be dying. I'm going to get sick. And so I think it creates problems, vestibular problems. You get motion sickness because your body can't interpret it as, this is a representational, not reality. And that's why I think that the higher frame rates, which may have more realistic depiction, may not be that great. And something that other people brought up is the fact that as you get higher resolution and higher frame rate, you see things as they really are. And, entertainment is actors portraying other people. And if you're seeing through the makeup and you're hearing their fake accents and you're seeing, the fake beard that they've pasted on them or the toupee that they've stuck on to make them look younger, it just doesn't work. It takes you out of the drama itself. So the 24 frames per second and the slightly lower resolution than is possible today masks a lot of that artificiality, and it keeps you in the dreamy world.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great overview. A couple of things we saw that I went to Dolby had a presentation at the 20th anniversary of The Matrix, and The Matrix, of course, was shot on film, but the effects were done in 2K, and you could immediately see every effect shot because it suddenly got soft. Like it was like super sharp, soft, super sharp, and you could tell where that all was, and it didn't. And, Star Wars was also episode 1 that I worked on, was also a lower resolution, and it definitely doesn't hold up now on a larger screen compared to what we're used to. I think you're absolutely right. I don't think film is ever going to leave 2398, or maybe not. When I say ever, not anytime soon. Like I think ever is too big of a word for that. But I do think that we're going to see more and more content running at higher frame rates. To exactly what Courtney was talking about, there are, I've had the opportunity to do a bunch of stuff that are higher frame rates, up to 120 frames a second, where where it really crosses over, and this is kind of the film version of the uncanny valley, is somewhere in the mid 90s. So at the mid 90s, your brain starts looking at it as a window. 60 gets close, but there's something before you get to 100 frames a second that your brain starts to just process it as a window. And especially at 4K or higher, 1080p on a big screen still looks soft, but at 4K and definitely at 8K, and as you start adding HDR, and there's people have been able to do that. 8K HDR on an LED wall. It literally changes how you do filmmaking. You can't do a lot of things that you used to do. To Courtney's point, you can't use jibs. We can, but a lot of people are going to get sick. Fast cutting goes away. Helicopter shots are kind of make your stomach just pull in all the time. And so it's good if you really want that effect. And some people will, but it is not good for the general filmmaking that we normally see. The 2398 constantly tells us that it's not real, and we're kind of conditioned to just follow along with the story. Where I do see high frame rates starting, HFR was kind of what we refer to it as high frame rate. But I think that where we'll see that is home videos. Most of our cell phones are capable of 120 frames a second now. We'll see it in sports because you want to feel like you're there. And they may have to cut out some of those blimp shots and so on and so forth for the same reasons. I think you'll see it in live concerts that are going to home because it has a very visceral feel, but only the live activation. So if they play it for you later, they may have another version that's there. And interestingly enough, and you might see some on television, morning shows and stuff like that, but you are going to see high frame rate slowly work into it. Almost every device now is capable of 120 frames a second. Most cameras are capable of 120 frames a second. The streaming technologies for 120 is pretty limited right now, but almost all the infrastructure is there to move to high frame rate and to do it interchangeably. Do 120 frames for this show and 24 for that show as we move into streaming. Not something you can do in live TV, but something that can be done in HLS because you're just defining what it is as it's coming in. So I think that's going to be a really interesting process there. There is one film genre that has been tested relatively successfully for high frame rate, and that is horror. And it is devastating. Like I literally had to look away. Like it's because the high frame rate makes it look like a window, and it makes it amplifies the thrill, so to speak, by about 10x. So I'm not sure. I mean, you could. I've grown to have the opinion that you could probably damage people mentally or psychologically with a horror film that is running at 120 frames a second. Like some people who are more sensitive to it could could really have a problem getting the images out of their head because it just feels like you're right in front of it. Now, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, that whole suspension of disbelief or belief thing with 24 frames gives you that extra wall in front of you, so you feel
it's like a safety wall.
You're safe, but when you're that close to it, it's an actuality on news, and that's nasty. I've used 120 on a regular basis to do special effects, like slowing it down. It holds up a lot better if you're gonna do some kind of dramatic shot and you want to slow it down. It's very silky, very smooth.
It is, but I think we'll just end up shooting at 240 or 480 frames a second, and then slowing down to 120. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, a couple of thoughts. Doug Trumbull, who came up with ShowScan, which was the 70 millimeter, 60 frame per second projection. The only place that he found where he could market it is for motion based at theme parks, where you're trying to simulate a ride by having the seats move, and then the film depicts reality, and that way you're trying to fool the body into believing that it's really up on that roller coaster or so. So it works great there, but as far as you say, is for commercial entertainment, dramatic entertainment, it's one thing. But the thing that I worry about is that we're raising a whole generation of kids that are sitting in front of video games, and the renderers on those video games are getting better and better and better, and they can almost do ray tracing real time now at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. So they're getting this rendered fantasy, in a first person POV, and they're seeing that, 16 hours a day. Their whole perception is going to be altered because being raised from birth with that type of perception, that level of reality, although it's computer generated, it's not real at all, but it looks real.
Well, I think that when you're used to high frame rate, what I will say is that film feels very framey, it just feels framey. And, so I think that the challenge for film will be that younger audiences will be less and less inclined to watch it, and they'll feel like it's old fashioned. And at some point that becomes a real issue, like that people stop going because they're not. And we're on the precipice of game-based, narratives, that people have been, machinima has been something that people have been playing with for a while. And that's going to live in a 60 to 120 frame world. And if you look at what's happening, there's a lot of, Matt Workman is probably on the lead end of cinema in that area. And he's not thinking about, I don't think he's doing a lot of high frame rate, but getting it all working in Unreal means that, people could be creating their own, Pixar anywhere, and being able to execute those things and tell stories with those. But those stories may be told at a much higher frame rate. And as people get used to it, it may be harder and harder to get them to go back to the slower frame rate. It's just because when you watch a lot of 120 frame per second, you go to the film and you're like, what is wrong? Like, why is this happening? Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I don't think people understand how that messes with your brain sometime. And I had a personal experience. I'm not afraid of heights generally. I had my first jump certificate. I jumped out of an airplane and some things like that. But once upon a time, the engineer at a radio station I was in took me up on the top of South Mountain here in Phoenix, Arizona, back when I lived there, and said, do you want to climb the tower? And I got about maybe 15 feet off the ground, and my whole brain just shut down. I don't know. I can't tell you what it was other than the fact that I was hanging on a ladder, and from the horizon perspective, it felt like I was 1.5 miles off the ground. And that told my brain, you are going to die. And it just literally shut down my nervous system. And I had to very, very slowly edge back down. This is somebody who, again, I'm not height sensitive, but that reality made real for me with my eyes, did something psychologically that I couldn't control at all. So I think that, as Alex and everybody is saying, it's a very, you have to walk slowly and carefully toward these things because it has an effect on people that you just don't anticipate.
Good, Nigel.
Yeah, well, we were lucky enough to go and see the ABBA Voyage event in London last week, which is, effectively they say holograms performing on the stage. And I can tell you that it's very effective, but the most effective moment is actually when the light show in the theater is continued into the screen, and where you lose that depth of understanding. You're no longer looking at a screen, but you're actually looking at a 3D HD enhanced show, that's when it's most effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I had a similar experience to Bill, but it was the old Twin Towers in New York. I had seen a film of this, and it didn't bother me at the time. But we went up to the restaurant at the top of the tower, one tower, and looked across to the other tower, and it turned out there was a 60-knot wind blowing that day, and you realized the two buildings were flexing, and they were flexing in opposite directions. So
right.
it just plays. It plays in reality. If you're looking at reality, it will play it absolute.
Yeah.
It turned my stomach rather badly that
exactly.
time.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer is up next from Viera, Florida. What's the best way to run a Mac Mini without keyboard, mouse, monitor attached?
Go, Peter.
So, and the question is he in the Apple ecosystem or not? I am. But one thing I will always do is I put a link in the panel chat, but also in the show notes. I always invest in the HDMI Ghost Simulator little plug-in that you can get from Amazon that plugs in and makes it think it has a 4K display into it, and then the machine will run by it. The machine will boot up by itself, and then I can come in through the share screen option on my Mac, or I can, if I choose to, I could set up, and I have in the past set up a VNC server and client to do it as well, and when I need to go into it, I run two of them headless right now. They're running right next to me, and they don't need to be pestered at all.
Right. Next question.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman, again in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He says, in reference to RGB color range, why is there a prevalence to use partial color range versus full? Partial results in the loss of the top and bottom 16 bits of an 8-bit 256 signal, limiting dynamic range. Why do ATEMs use full when computers can't cope?
And this may be the cutoff that we're seeing here, and because full is the proper one. Full is the reason that we cut off the top and bottom so that it's easier to manage. But full is the proper version of it. It's all the bits. so anyway, that's why it should be, in my opinion, should be full. So it should be giving it full, and then we should be figuring out how to interpret that properly. So we'll figure that out. But we don't want to give up and do the lesser of it just because because that's the way the format is. So yeah, next question.
Next question comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Anyone used a Pelican phone cases? I'm looking for a 14 Pro Max cases, and the OtterBox Defender Pros in black are on back order.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think it depends on what you want to do with your phone daily. Here's my problem. Any of the thicker cases tend to be problematic if you're going to use your phone for something like mounting on a gimbal or something like that. And if you don't want to have to derobe your phone every time you use it and something like that, I look for a very thin but still protective case. And that means I don't have to mess with it on shoots, particularly if I see something happening and I think I want to go really quickly onto the gimbal. The case that is small enough not to overbalance or cause problems with my system means I can snap it on real quick and get the shot. That is almost impossible as you get up into these really heavy Defender cases. Now, if you're really fumble-fingered and you drop your phone a lot, it may be more valuable for you to get the protection that these high-end, super protective covers are, but I can't use them. That's just how I function.
Go ahead, Peter.
Oops. So I ran into the same problem that Chris ran into, which is my go-to case for a while has always been the Defender case, and it's out of back order. My backup case, because I've used this brand in the past, are the spec cases, because they're all both the Defenders and the spec cases are OtterBox, and Defender cases, spec cases are meet mil-spec standards for drop, because I am fumble-fingered, Bill.
I hear that. I'm close.
I am fumble-fingered, so I mean, I can't tell you. At least once a day, I drop the phone flat-faced on concrete floor, and the case protects it.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, same with me as as described before. What I'm interested in is the first case that's going to come out that's going to do something with Dynamic Island. So I'm keeping an eye on that because I think, I mean, it's terribly badly named, but that aside, I think that's an interesting thing. And I've noticed no cases yet are thinking that through.
Hashid, real quick.
I think this is quite an intriguing process because I thought they make their cases in-house. So it's really interesting, maybe if they're out of materials and such, that they're even out of the Fender cases or back-ordered. On S22 phones, they've usually produced them in-house and shipped them right over. So we might just be seeing something just as a stopgap.
Yeah. And Hosmic actually sent me the Peak Design to check out, and I'm still using it that's my primary one here. What I liked about it is that it's thin enough that it is, to Bill's point, a relatively thin thing to look at, and it fits onto a lot of things. But this back area here, you can snap it onto a lot of things. And what it does is it snaps in and actually becomes part. Like it'll snap to a setup in my little wallet. And if I can't fit enough credit cards in here, then I have too many, as far as I'm concerned, or cards in here. And then it just snaps, onto the back. And I find that I lose my phone and I lose my wallet, but I almost never lose both. I need them at a high enough iteration rate. So I've been pretty happy with that one. I put a thing across the front, and I'm going to be giving this whole package to my wife in a couple days. So as I get ready to go down and get the 14 running. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. iOS 16 for phone dropped. Anyone take the plunge on the full release and hit any surprises?
Go ahead, Peter.
Short answer is yes and no. I mean, I actually went on to the beta, I think the third beta in for iOS 16. So I can't say I've had any surprises since then. I did a massive cleanup last night, getting ready for the new phone coming this Friday, but no surprises. How you fix the lock screen and put the widgets on the lock screen, they said, Apple will say it's discoverable. I had to watch Mac Break Weekly a couple of times to say how they showed Leo how to do that live on the air. So because it's not obvious. I'm sorry, it is not obvious.
Go ahead, John.
So I downloaded it on Monday, and that, like Peter just said, that the startup, the lock screen, the font on the time was gigantic, and it really bothered me. So I changed it back to skinny font again. But continuity camera, although you have to have Ventura to do the webcam stuff, but you can take stuff from your phone and immediately move it into all the Apple apps. So Keynote and Pages and all that, that's super handy because I do that a lot. And the other cool thing is the image capture. And so you can go any of your image or any of the frames and you can capture Chris Fenwick and then send it to him via text message. So it's like instant alpha. It's really useful.
Yeah, I have to admit that last year I was pretty aggressive about upgrading to the current operating system on everything, and I felt like I really paid a heavy price for that. So I probably am not gonna. I'm gonna probably take some time before I do that again. So we'll watch how it works for everybody else. Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington said, "Did we miss any other announcements that came out of the IBC show?"
What do you think, Guy? Did we miss any announcements?
Throwing the ball to myself, I guess here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and queued up right with the camera to show.
See,
so here is the
pulling what we like to call in the show a Cochran. All right.
Yeah, this was one camera. I just watched this morning because Dr. Andrew Cross, who's now the CEO over at Grass Valley, put up on his LinkedIn some of the show highlights. And I had seen this camera a few weeks ago, but until this gentleman gave us some more in-depth analysis on it, I didn't realize that it has encoders and decoders in it. So over IP, you could send back your super source, layout, what's in program, and properly frame up your shot. It's also global shutter, 15 stops of dynamic range. You got your focus demand and zoom demand on. These are the kind of cameras that we would use. Like here's me with an LDK, that's a Grass Valley LDK, and that's CeeLo Green. So on the bigger events, this is a 12 camera shoot with jib and all that. We're using these Grass Valleys that just have awesome signal to noise ratio. And there was a bunch of other stuff in this Grass Valley page that's just IBC announcements. They acquired Flowix. They showed some cool cloud stuff. There's all these videos that they're still putting up right now. There's audio audio to cloud. They've got a color grading camera control remotely from the cloud. So you can hook in that camera that I just showed and then be able to remotely shade it. Discussions on the cloud or not to cloud. There were some mobile demos, and they're editing using JPEG XS. That camera will also do JPEG XS. One of the other things that kind of quietly slid in there too was we had Frame.io on a while back, and we had that camera to cloud. And at the time that Michael Cioni came on, he was showing off, it was about an $1,800 Teradek encoder. And now at the show, ATEMs announced that their little baby ATEMs Ninja V, which is like a $500 device, will do the same thing. So it's kind of like $1,800 to $500 in a year. It just blows my mind how fast we're moving. So for those of you that don't know, you can record in H.265, proxy file goes up with the time code, and you can have that for editors to begin editing on and then bring the full res later. But that was two of the things that I'm just like, nobody's talking about it. These are two really cool things that kind of slid on the radar at the show.
I think ATEMs, if I'm correct, I don't have it all right in front of me, but I think they had quite a few announcements actually, and I think that they're working on a lot of transport as well. So not just the camera to cloud, but some low latency, high quality transport between point to point. And so we're seeing so there's a fair bit of that going on right now. Both Teradek's got I think rolled out or at least talked about some wider things, and we're going to try to get both of those companies on. I have pretty good contacts there, so we'll have them come on.
Yeah, that's right. They did it. Teradek did release a Bolt 600 that's in like the $1,800 range. But when you get a hit like what we had happen at the wedding that Greg Gibson shot, you start to realize that it's like, do I spend $600 or do I buy once, cry once, and spend $1,800 and have something that's almost imperceptible latency that's just rock solid up to 1,500 feet. So that's another thing to take a look at. Or do I just rent for the gig? It's just like, you don't have to own this stuff if you're not using it all the time, because stuff is changing so fast. So don't buy it, rent it.
Yeah, we had some of the original Bolts, and then we moved up to the 3000s or whatever that were with the full sized antenna and everything else, and still only trusted them. I mean, we only ever gave a Teradek maybe 100 feet to run. Like we would do everything we can to keep it within 100 feet, even with something that's supposed to be up to 1,500. And then we don't have any problems. so it's, and then after that, we started, usually if something couldn't handle a Teradek, we would work with 3G wireless. It's not connected to 3G. It's a company out of, I think, Virginia that does custom, transmission. They do it for like NASCAR. But we switched very quickly. Like 90% of our stuff could all be done with the Teradeks, with the high end one not going very far. And as soon as it got more complicated than that, we just went straight to 1,000. Next question.
Sarah Doyle in Falls Church, Virginia is up next. Anyone stuck in the Microsoft Teams world have any look at the upcoming release of Epiphan Connect service?
Yeah, so it looks like Epiphan's partnering with Microsoft to figure out ways to do better contribution to teams, for events. I think that given what we saw at IBC, I think that Epiphan, this is going to be the best solution that you're going to get if Teams is partnering with them. I think maybe there won't be a ton of other folks, and I think Epiphan is the right cost place for Microsoft to work at. I think it'll be very hard for them to compete with ZoomIso. Like, I think that if you're stuck in Teams, you're going to be using, the Epiphan is definitely something to look at. I think if you're trying to make a decision about what to use, I think that the choice just became super obvious. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says portable laser projector 4K from Anker, and he's got a link there. Is it bright enough to use at a pop-up dinner event to show video? He notes that 2200 lumens seems low. Any suggestions for a 2K laser projector?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, in most of those kind of circumstances, the question I'd ask first is what kind of control do you have on room lighting? I mean, if this is some sort of pop-up dinner event, if you can put individual lights on the tables to provide little pools of light and keep the room lights down, then I would think something in that area of brightness in a dim room would probably work okay. Now, on the other hand, if it's a ballroom situation and you've got to keep the room lights up, you're going to probably need more punch from your projector, and I think you're wise to think of something that, up in the 5,000 ANSI lumens kind of zone or above. But that's just my thinking.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with what Bill is saying. And I think people are used to seeing projections or films on bright screens. So they may not excuse the fact that you only have $2,000 to spend for laser when Sony's selling them for like $50,000 or Barco or Christie. It's just a whole different ballgame.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, Bill said it right. It's dependent on the ambient level of light in the room when you're dealing with projection, because the projection screen reflects the ambient light in the room and reduces your contrast, and it's going to look all washed out. So
yeah,
maybe the best. Oh, sorry, I was just trying to clear my throat unsuccessfully. Maybe the best thing to do is if you have the room, is try and set it up as rear projection, and you might get a little brighter light, but you got to try and keep the ambient light from hitting the front of that screen or darken the room. And if it's a daytime event, you're going to be fighting a losing battle. You might be better off just to put up a 70-inch LED screen, or LCD screen.
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things that you have to decide, are you going to use it once or are you going to use it over and over again? If you're using it all the time, then look at buying something. But if you're using it once, I would rent something that was a lot more powerful than something you could afford to have for an event. $2,000 for an event that's going to be used in a dinner party depends on how big the dinner party is, and again, what the ambient light is, what time of day. All those things are things that you're going to have to kind of take into account, because it is not a lot of, it'll look great in a room, like it'll look great in a 20 by 20 room that you've got a big screen in and you want to watch with your friends. As you move away from that size, it will start to be less and less useful. So that's when we do outdoor projections, we start in tens of thousands of lumens. So, to start thinking about that. So it just depends. And that's still at night, like it does at 25,000 lumens Barcos mapped on top of each other still only works at night. So sort of kind of put it in perspective of brightness. Next question.
Eric Billings in Washington, D.C. says, does the panel have a preferred service provider for data archiving? I'm looking for cloud storage for 3 to 4 terabytes of audio files. I'm leaning toward AWS Glacier, but I'm not. But I'm open to better options. Thanks.
Good, Courtney.
Well, if you got that much, I was going to recommend, I use Carbonite just for, data files that for, financial accounting files, things that, you really can't afford to lose. But if you're trying to move 3 or 4 terabytes on a daily basis, then something like AWS or something where you have a higher speed connection, Carbonite, those type of services that are automatic backups, you just designate which folders you want to keep backed up, and it'll automatically synchronize them to folders in the cloud. And it does it in background. But if it's got a whole mountain of stuff to do, it's going to take a long time to do it, or it's going to eat up all your bandwidth. And if you're trying to do a Zoom call or something, it may be deciding to, usually they monitor the bandwidth and only jump into effect when you're not using the bandwidth somewhere else. But that can back you up on those backups so they don't get done.
All right, go ahead, Peter.
So I ended up, Courtney mentioned Carbonite. Well, the founders of Carbonite came up with a storage solution a couple of years ago called Wasabi, which is priced much more competitively than AWS and uses the same APIs as AWS, interestingly enough. And that's, and I run a backup client on one of those headless Mac minis that consumes all my selected files from my other machines and sends them up. And I think I've got 7 terabytes up there right now. And it cost me like $20 a month.
That's great. Next question.
Our friend Hasmik Gajar in Cape Town, South Africa says, for after-hours conversations on cooking, I do not plan the normal setup as for a cook-along. Outside of seeing the talent on camera, are there any suggestions? Should we be on a desk or in the kitchen? Any ideas to consider?
Good, Bill.
Well, my first thought was it just depends. I am assuming Diamante is going to be talking to us about what she's doing. And to me, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, if she says you should be using a 4-inch paring knife versus a 6-inch paring knife, that's what I always do. The ability to have them close at hand and be able to grab them, or, a melon baller or some exotic tool that she's recommending to help you prepare these dishes, maybe being in that circumstance where she can reach over, get that, show it to us, and that'll help keep the show interesting. I can see her not wanting in a conversational circumstance to be stuck just standing at her position for the presentation show, but I would balance those two things. What does she think she's going to need to have access to really give people an idea of the answer to their questions, and what's most comfortable for her, because it takes some energy to stand for an hour and handle people's questions.
Good husband.
Yeah, we thought that just doing cook-alongs can be quite intense and demanding. So, but at the same time, we kind of trail the knowledge side of it behind. So we leave a lot of the nuances and minutiae in terms of many of these, what goes into cooking. So we thought we'd do a conversation, and then obviously Bill is right. I've thought about that. But also people could come with any question and any piece of conversation. And as I put it in Discord, it's really people who bring the questions and conversations who are going to produce the show. So I'm just trying to figure out what would be the appropriate kind of setting. And so maybe kitchen is appropriate because everything is handy. Everything is around her. She can just turn around and grab whatever ingredient or utensil she needs to. But I'm hoping it'll be more conversational. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think I would probably stick to the kitchen just because of it. It just feels like that's the set that you're talking into, even if you're not. It would just feel weird to talk about cooking in a living room or something else. I think that, so to me, I feel like the kitchen's kind of the natural place, but it could be more, it could be seated, it could be more casual, it could be a variety of other things, but I think in there makes the most sense. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the other thing is maybe bring something like a bar stool that's very comfortable or some kind of seating into the kitchen so that you're in that, but the seat essentially signals we're chatting, we're not cooking. And that gives the audience a signal as to what this show is all about. And that might be more comfortable for her over the course of an hour. And particularly since your wife is so good at this, it may last 2 hours as people want to get more of her expertise and keep asking questions.
Good husband.
Unfortunately, I have 2 6K cameras, but I don't plan on holding my teleprompter home for this conversation. So that's what got me thinking. So what I'll probably do is have the lights, but then have the 6K on a tripod and try and get her to look at the camera as much as possible, which will be challenging, but I think we can get through it.
I've been really thinking about this, and I started working on it. I haven't, like many other things, I'm fiddling with it and not making a lot of progress yet. But I really think there's a big market for a PTZ head that can handle a lot of weight, like a teleprompter or a camera, but doesn't have a lot of performance. It's just smooth, and it moves about 15, 20 degrees, just back and forth and up and down. Just so someone's talking, you can kind of reframe and move things over and do things and look down. But the key is to have it be very like a stepper motor or something that is high, that's geared up in a way that it can you feel like it's almost a gearhead, that is, but it's not designed to be any whip pans or get places quickly. Just readjust. I think that in what you're talking about, it would really make a difference. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're only doing 10 degrees up, down, left, right, you could just put the PTZ inside the teleprompter rather than mount the teleprompter on the PTZ, because the PTZ, as long as it can stay within the limits of that glass, it can pan around, and the actor's eye contact is going to still be within to the close enough to the lens, because it's rotating about a nodal point 10 or 20 degrees. It's not going to change. So as long as you are not on a super wide lens and trying to accommodate an actor that's moving, then you're going to have to mount the teleprompter. If the actor is not moving, they're in a chair or standing in one spot, you can do that with your little Insta360 Like,
But you can, but you need HDMI out. Like if that Insta360 had a pro version that was a little bumped up a little bit, it would take over the world. So, but it feels like you just want. I've wanted this for years. Is I don't need to use a full PTZ. I just need to be watching someone and going, I just need to move the camera this way a little bit, or this way, or reframe them, or do something. And I feel like it's a missing piece in the market.
I'd say 90% of all the teleprompter work we do these days for corporate stuff is a roll-up configuration where the teleprompter is not even attached to the camera. It's rolled up right in front of the lens, and the camera operator is on his regular tripod, just shoots through it.
Yeah.
But so they can have 10 or 12 degrees pan, tilt, zoom. They can reframe and come out to a wide shot, go into a close-up without moving the teleprompter.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we're always trying to think about how we send kits out to people that are relatively easy to assemble and doesn't, the parts all have to snap together. And so being able to have them snap together, but then have that control would be kind of the bomb. Go ahead, Hosma.
Yeah, I know I'm going to have a hard time for the Minty to just sit in one place. So
right, so you're going to be operating.
No. So I'm opting to bring in my iPhones so I can have different angles in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So if she's turning around and holding something else, at least I have a camera there. So the main talent camera will be the 6K. The others will be just 2 or 3 iPhones.
Yeah, one thing that I was just thinking about the other day was that it would be great if ATEMs were able to apply LUTs to their inputs. Like if an ATEM just was able to add a LUT to every image, that you just drop it in, it means that you could sync all your inputs at the switcher level, which would be super useful. Next question.
John Preto in Las Vegas says Emmy ratings were down 20%. Thoughts?
I'll go ahead, Courtney.
Well, it didn't promo. It was on NBC, I believe. And I didn't see hardly any promos until I was in the car.
I didn't even know.
And I went, the Emmys are tonight? I didn't even know that.
I got a ping that said, man, these sets look horrible. And I was like, for what? And they're like, the Emmys. And I was like, the Emmys are tonight? The same thing. I was like,
ever since they moved them off of Sunday nights to a Monday, viewership has been dropping. And the other thing is, you look at the nominees, almost 80 to 90% of the nominees are for subscription shows, that are on cable or subscription. They're not on broadcast television. They're not regularly broadcast. They're streaming or they're pay-per-view or they're, so the competition isn't all really competing against each other because they're on different streaming services, which have to be subscribed to rather than you can't just twist the dial.
And it's also very diffuse. Like a lot of people don't know who any of these people are. Like the market is so fragmented. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, they're promoting a broadcast channels, promoting pretty much an event that takes place on subscription services like HBO and Cinemax and Showtime. And it's just becoming more and more of a non-event. It's kind of boring, to be honest with you.
Good, Peter.
Well, I will openly admit the first I knew that the Emmys were the day after when I was watching the CBS News in the morning and they were talking about they happened.
Right.
And I realized I don't watch enough regular television. As a matter of fact, I don't watch any regular television anymore, that I never saw the run up to it. I never knew it was happening. I completely missed the dates. Unlike the old days where, frankly, every broadcaster was promoting, I've been nominated for an Emmy. Well, I just didn't see any of that stuff.
It's funny when in a world where none of us see any promos or ads, I almost never see a TV ad ever. And so without that, it's hard to tell us that it's happening. Go ahead, Bill.
I think this is a big issue. Also, I think there was a gulf. Obviously, these are the programs for this year's Emmys that were produced and aired, 18 months ago in some cases. So it's really easy to forget it. Like I was remembering, it's great that Ted Lasso won an award, and I really like the show, but I haven't seen it in like 6 months, and because there hasn't been any new episodes of it. Also, it's just surprising to me. I guess I'm not in the market for it anymore, but when I was at Comic-Con, they had this huge display for Abbott Elementary, which is an ABC sitcom that I guess has done really well in their target demos. But if I hadn't seen that at Comic-Con, I would have no idea that it existed to today. Never seen an ad for it. I've never seen anything. And I guess it's a big success in their target market, but it's just completely missed me.
I also think that, I think a lot of actors and directors and so on and so forth decided to use, I predicted this when I saw it, decided to use the platform of Oscars and Emmys as a platform to talk about issues that they thought were important. And whether you're conservative or liberal, you're turning off half the audience. It's a devastating and incredibly horrible idea. To talk about politics. We don't talk about politics here for a good reason, because it'll make half the people upset. And I think that as the entertainment and as Hollywood, Hollywood's always had some politics, but they've gotten much more shrill about their politics. And I think the problem is that they're turning off half their audience, and they're suddenly noticing that somewhere between 20 and 50% drop-offs in feature films and shows and everything else. And that's because, no matter which side you take, you're going to, turn off half of the country. And that from a business perspective, it's just a horrible idea. Go ahead, Courtney.
I did watch the show, and we could discuss the staging or something in another question. But one thing that I noticed is that you would have sometimes 3 or 4 nominees within a single category, like Best Supporting Actor, will all be from the same show.
Right.
So if you watch that show, or if you didn't watch that show, you're not really interested in 3 out of the 4 people that are up for the award or nominated. Yeah. So I guess we've diluted the amount of dramatic shows to the point that you have to, in order to nominate people, you have to get 3 or 4 people that are competing from the same show to be nominated in the same category. And but they're adding new categories like, Best Competition Show. That's a new category, Amazing Race and those type of competitions. The Voice.
Yeah. I think that it's going to be, anyway, we'll see. I think that they're probably, they'll drop off a broadcast within the next 3 to 5 years. Like they'll just be on some streaming network, but we won't see them on broadcast because they can't hold an audience that's large enough anymore to validate we've already seen some of them drop off. And I think we'll end up seeing more of them drop off a broadcast because it's not that no one's interested, but not enough to sell the ads against. Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. In running a show, should you use GMT or UTC for time? For example, Austin is UTC 5 and also GMT 5, -5.
Well, it depends on how pedantic you want to be, because technically UTC is an international standard for measuring time, not for stating the time. It happens to be that UTC 0 or UTC 1 is the same as GMT 1. Greenwich Mean Time, and it lines up. So you can use, in the casual way, you can use them interchangeably. Those of us of a certain age will remember GMT till the day we die. My son, who is turning 39 this year, in the Army, taught him UTC. So that's just the way he thinks. But it actually is. They are different. If you go into the formal definitions, one is a time zone. GMT is a time zone. Right. UTC is actually a method for measuring the time offset.
Bill?
And to that point, this is why I've been nuts ever since I left Arizona, because if they didn't do anything else right, never going on daylights, ever changing the clocks was brilliant. And it just drives me nuts now that I'm in California, this changer clocks. It's a measurement device. 10 o'clock today should be 12 hours or 24 hours from 10 o'clock yesterday. And when you mess with it, it drives me nuts.
We're closing the gap, I think, on that one. It hasn't quite made it through Congress yet, but it feels like it gets closer and closer and closer that we should get rid of something that really shouldn't exist anymore. Next question.
Santa Bart Gaffney and Economawak. I'm sorry, I probably got that wrong. What is the opportunity for an after-hours mini masterclass in ATEM Chromakey settings for newbies?
Go ahead, Guy.
The two Santas seem to always be hanging out in after hours. I figure Santa Greg could give you some settings. But there is a new device coming out. There's the HD version of the Ultimatte that's $495. It's going to give you way more control. So I'd be looking at that and then getting a group together to start to show off their settings, because there's just so many more little tweaks in here. You can see that you've got the mattes, you've got map process, screen, there's density. There's so much more, and that's free now. So before you used to have to buy the hardware controller in addition to the keyer, and now you could just do it with the software. And so here's an example of using a Pocket with an Ultimatte 12 HD mini into an ATEM ISO, and then you even get control of the camera now, an SDI. So it'll do the conversion for you, HDMI to SDI into an ATEM SDI. So that's another thing to take a look at.
That's really cool. Next question.
Santa Bart Gaffney again from Economawalk, looking for a 4K HDMI lipstick camera for tight close-up work. Any thoughts?
Good, Bill.
I've tried to use them a couple of times, and I've never had really good luck with them. And here's why. It depends on how close you want to get. If I was doing a coin show, I would think something like that mounted on a little thing on tabletop would be really useful. But every time I've tried to use a lipstick camera as either a handheld or something to get just a medium shot, a medium close-up, it's harder for me to execute that than it is to take a camcorder that has a close-up function and just shoot it that way. So when you get down to those really small form factors, it seems to me that they're just harder to operate than something designed. And to pull back a little farther and zoom in on a parfocal lens where everything stays in focus is easier to get a tight shot for me than going down and fiddling with a little focus adjustment on a lipstick camera. My preference.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Or you do what Adam Savage does. And if you look at his tested channel, he just uses an iPhone on a gooseneck arm. And when he needs to change for close-up, he just goes, "Brr," and pushes it in, and it holds the camera very close. And the iPhone adjusts for the closeness of it. So it's got an autofocusing camera built in. It has a pretty clean production for recording. And if you have a live output out of it, you could use it as a second camera. And Tony Mobley has been using his iPhone as a second camera or a lipstick camera. Just getting, if you're trying to do super macro, then you'd have to go to some type of external camera with a macro lens on it. If you're getting extreme close-ups of like coins, like Bill was saying.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what subject matter you're doing, because it definitely will change how you approach that. Next question.
Hasma Kajar, Cape Town. I started reading the ATEM Extreme manual and found it filled many gaps in my knowledge. How do panelists approach manuals that come with your gadgets, especially audio mixers, switchers, key software, and so forth?
Good, Peter.
I will make a first pass through attempting to read them. Sometimes there are better uses of the English language, and sometimes they're not so good at the English language, at least not in my case. Some people can't write technical manuals to save their soul. But I can always find a nugget of knowledge going through it, at least the first time. Then I often go off and play with the device for a while. And then I go back and read it again to see what I've learned, what I'm doing. Sort of like what Hasmuth has been talking about on Discord recently, where he's been doing the deep dive. And I assume he kind of followed the same process. He read the manuals the first time. Now he's trying to figure out, what did I learn from the manuals and what more things can I fill in the gaps with?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I'm old school. I like to get a printed manual and read through it from cover to cover. And unfortunately, the printed manual has gone the way of the dodo bird. They'll give you, here's the manual, here's a QR code. You can find the manual online. And a lot of times they've thought, oh, well, let's just do an interactive manual online, and it'll all be, in HTML and linked. And, if you look up this subject, you'll go right to that page of that subject, and it'll show you that subject. Well, that's great if you're looking for one specific thing you don't know how to do. But if you really want to know how to use something and make sure you're not skipping over some feature that you never knew that device had because it's buried 5 menus deep, you got to read the manual cover to cover, because you're never going to find that stuff, because the HTML5 based manuals hide all that stuff from you unless you're going directly through the index to something you know about already or you're searching for. So I like to read through, and that way I discover all the little tips and tricks that you may not even know exist, because the technology has gotten so deep and the functionality is so deep on most electronic products these days that you may never discover what that camera can actually do until you read the manual fully.
Good, Peter.
In light of what Courtney says, I should add to the fact, because I have for my 6K Pro, my ATEM Mini Pro Extreme, and for my sound devices, I actually took the PDFs, went to FedEx office, and printed them out and put them in 3-ring binders.
Possible.
Yeah, I've developed a renewed affection for my ATEM because I got to understand it a lot better. I like structured learning, so I normally enjoy going from page 1 to the last page and in detail, because that allows me to troubleshoot. That's the biggest issue, because once I know what I'm doing. So I think thus far in all my production work, I had a workflow figured out, but never understood Luma keys and downstream key. When does one use one or the other? And I didn't even realize that in the preview, you have 4 keys that allow you to preview what's sitting in any one of the 4 Luma keys on the ATEM. So I've learned all of that, and it gives me increased confidence in what I'm doing. And that's probably the biggest factor.
I have to admit, there's a whole discussion here about learning styles. For me, I read enough of the manual to get it going, get it off the ground, and then I start working. But then I have the manual all the time, and I look back at the manual, and then I Google, and then I go to YouTube, and then I put every manual for every piece of hardware that I'm using, I put it on my iPad. So I put it in books or whatever so that I can open it up and it's there. It's actually much easier to go through. And to me, it's easier to go through the electronic version because I can search for things. Search for this term and it comes out. It shows me every time it showed up, and then I can go find it. And I'm able to move very quickly through that. It's hard for me to remember anything that is just handed to me. Like, I'm not very good at just absorbing information. What I'm really good at is using information to fix problems. And so I try to do things with it. Like, for instance, I can read a lot of things, but the way I'm going to really get deeper into ISO and Isadora and all the things is just to do projects with it. And then I'm going to be able to ask questions. I'm going to be able to read the manuals where I need to, figure things out, and then just keep on iterating until I can, and that's just how I have to learn. I have to have a problem to solve. So I just try to create problems and projects that will allow me to learn different pieces. And then usually what happens is I go, I don't understand this at all. And then I dig through the entire section. But usually that has been like I'm now ready to have that information. I wasn't ready for it in a blank slate. I'm ready for it because I know that I don't understand super sources, or I know I don't understand keying, and now I want to know everything about it. And then usually I want to do tests, to figure that out. Now, next question.
Next one comes from Brian Shandon, Sydney, Australia. He says, what are some of the overlooked yet important roles in a production?
Bill?
Well, they're not so much overlooked. We talk about planning all the time. And every project I've ever been involved with, the quality of the planning in advance of actually executing it has always had a direct relationship with the quality of the finished product. In that respect, I talk a lot about one of the most overlooked things, and it works in Hollywood, it also works in corporate, it works everywhere, is a thing called the treatment. The treatment is basically a 1 or 2 page listing of why are we doing this thing in the first place? Why are we going to take all of our time and effort to go make this thing on video? And so you should think about, what am I trying to do? Who is the audience it is going for? How will we measure success at the end of it? And in the middle, you really want to describe it concisely. That's why it's usually 1 or 2 pages. I've very seldom seen a treatment that's really good that's more than that. You don't want to go in detail, but that becomes one of the Bibles. As you're having problems in scripting, or as you're having problems in editing or anywhere else, you can go back to the original document, the treatment for the piece, and say, am I in line with the goals that I articulated back there at the beginning for why and if you miss a line, you got a problem and you got to go fix the alignment.
Yep. Go ahead, Mitchell.
The producer. Technically the producer worries about everything. You have to be
not like the executive producer, which only worries about the money.
Yeah, it's just a title anyhow that they throw to people.
I remember someone a long time ago told me, I really want to be executive producer for this show. And I'm like, yeah, you really want to be executive producer for the show? That's like, you would like to declare yourself as I didn't do anything other than provide money. And so
the producer's got to worry about everything.
I said, sure, we're happy to add you to the 3 other people that are.
And then the second job, craft services.
There you go. Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't know about overlooked, but the first assistant director is really, especially on a dramatic show, is key to bringing you in on time.
The hammer.
They're the hammer that drives the crew, that makes sure everybody's there at the right time to do the right job and doesn't overschedule and have you there at 7 o'clock in the morning. If the scene you're shooting you're not going to get it to it till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so that you're running into overtime in the afternoon. So if the first assistant director handles all the scheduling of the personnel for that shoot day and the moving around from scene to scene, whether to cut a scene, they have to talk to the director and writer and see if they're running behind schedule. Can we cut this scene and shoot it at a later date? Do we have this location at a later date? How much will it cost us to get the production back into this location? And they have to take all that stuff into consideration on the fly, because it changes throughout the day. As you find that you get further and further behind in your shooting schedule, you're not staying to the schedule, then you have to reschedule toward the end of the day. You have to make sure you call all the actors and people and crew members that are going to be needed for the next day's shooting at the end of the day. And you can't wait too late to do that, because there's union rules about short turnarounds. So it's a huge moving clock of schedules and disasters and putting out fires. And a good assistant director can make or break production.
In a lot of ways, I mean, the way I view it, at least, the first AD allows the director to be creative. Like, they allow them to sit there and only think about the film. And if the director has to go into the weeds and figure this stuff out, their mind isn't fresh, to think about what they need to actually do. So sometimes you have a first AD, second AD, a whole bunch of people there, that coordinators and, all kinds of things to keep, in a large film at least, to keep the director in a bubble, where they're not, so they can sit there and creatively, because if you take that away, you just, you rush a miracle man, you get rotten miracles, and in the same way, if you push a director to have to do a whole bunch of things. And that's the hardest part with like independent films. You get producer directors, and that's a disaster most of the time, because now the problem is the director shouldn't be thinking about the budget. They have to think about it to some degree, but they think about what they want. Now, they may be told they can and can't do something, and then they think about it. But in a lot of ways, you want as many parts of that machine around them to kind of shield them from a lot of those things and figure out how to make it work. And then only impact them when you can't shield them anymore from what they're doing.
Well, the worst combo is director, camera operator, camera DP.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
is the worst.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, it's interesting listening to Bill when he first spoke. He described something that I would recognize as the project charter, because that's what PMI, that's what the Project Management Institute, the formal authority on certifying project managers in industry, would recognize as the project charter. And that is the person who has to create that, or the people who have to create that, are absolutely needed. And it is an absolutely needed document for any type of, I'd say, if you're spending more than $5, really, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think the other things that we see, at least in live environments, not so much in film environments, that get overlooked are media management. Like, media management is an important piece of, they always seem to get left out of the crew list. The first thing people tend to do is also they tend to cut the PAs. Like, oh, we don't have enough money, let's just cut some of the PAs because they're not doing anything critical. And you're like, wow, like you just took all the oil out of the engine. It's like it's one of the least expensive crew positions and the most useful to allow all of your people who you're paying a lot of money. Basically, what happens is you cut the efficiency of everyone you're paying lots of money to, because they're now trying to figure out how they're going to manage meals, and someone can't run an errand, and now they don't have a pen, and there's all these things that don't happen. So PAs, I tend to try to, as much as I can, add more PAs than less, because it's just a great way to lubricate the whole system and make sure everything's working. And then, as I said before, catering. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, and then script supervisor. I mean, did we get the line? Was it read right?
Continuity.
Continuity. If they're looking at the hand, or did they pick up that burger with the right hand in the previous scene when we broke for lunch? Was their hair this way, that way? Yeah, somebody's got to be watching that stuff. And if you get back to the edit and you find it that you don't have that shot, or the continuity's off, it just creates a nightmare where you have to reshoot it.
This is one of the things that I'm hoping we get to test sometime in 2023. I think 2022 is kind of water under the bridge at this point for us, but I really want to do a thing where we're shooting for a weekend, out of a stage, and we're using camera to cloud so that lots of us can download while we're shooting the piece. Like we're shooting like a little short piece and people can download it, throw it into the edit. Because I think that there's a pipeline there that allows you to see it in the edit while we're still on set and say, I could, there's one little problem with that continuity there. Or if you gave me one more close up, I could cut around this problem, or it would be even better if I just had a little bit more or a slightly wider shot, or can you get this into the frame? And the idea, is I think that if you planned for a less aggressive shoot day and then had an hour, just have time at the end of every setup to capture a couple things that people are seeing because they have real-time access to the content. I think it could be obviously a tar pit if you don't do it well, but it also could be really powerful to get the things that all of us are missing every single time we do a shoot. We're like, oh, if we had only that one shot. And sometimes we go back with budget and get that one shot, but it's a super expensive solution. Go ahead, Bill.
And if you want a brilliantly entertaining view at some of these roles behind the scene and how they actually work on a big budget production, if you can get a hold of Paramount Plus even for a week or something like that, there's a show there called The Offer that is a backstage look at the making of The Godfather, the original Godfather movie, that is absolutely entertaining. And if you don't understand how movies really get made, all the structural thing, what a producer does, what a director does, how they interact, it is just fun to watch those 7 episodes, and you'll come back with a master class of what really happens on sets.
That's great. Next question.
David Brady in New York City says, what are the best and or recommended and or preferred drives to use with ATEM ISOs and Extreme ISOs? And if all 8 are ISO'd, what's the best size for maximum record time?
Good, Peter.
I'm going to go back to, if I go out to the Blackmagic support site, they last updated their approved list for drives back in November of 2021. And they have the largest drive is a Glyph RAID device that runs at 4 terabytes that the ATEM Mini Extreme will support. But there is a very specific list that they have tested and approved for writing. So I always start there. I learned my lesson with the T5 versus T7 debacle way back when, as we all did. I went back and reread the list and said, oh, the T7's not on the list, despite the fact that Amazon said it's a newer drive.
The largest I've tested is for the ISO is 4 terabytes. And I'm not sure, for some reason I felt like we had a conversation where it doesn't address more than that, but I'm not 100% sure of that. So 4 terabytes.
That may be the case.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything recommended more than 4, and so I think that might be the issue. And yeah, I mean, I think most SSD drives that are the big thing you want to look at is testing them against sustained use. But even at 8, it's not 8 at H.265 or H.264 is not a huge amount of data, for one of these drives to take on. So not compared to uncompressed or RAW or Apple ProRes. So I'm not sure. We definitely haven't tested them at full quality for long periods of time. But I think 4 terabytes, and then the list that they've approved, and not the T7. Next question.
Harshid Trivedi in Daytona Beach, Florida, here on the panel says, can you explain the whole NTSC versus PAL with regard to video and film in general?
Go ahead, Courtney.
No. Yeah, it's well, the basics. It's a fairly complex question. You could spend hours doing that, but those are 2 broadcast standards, and they use different methods, different frame rates, different resolutions. The original NTSC and the original PAL broadcast standards, they do color differently. PAL is 50 hertz, 50 frames per second. NTSC is 2997. And PAL all uses integer frame rates. NTSC uses non-integer frame rates to accommodate the color. Those are the basic differences that will get you. But, if you need to get into how that color is stored in the broadcast transmission signal, that's a long discussion.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, basically back in the day when broadcast ruled everything, there were really three systems, NTSC, PAL, and that one called CCAM. And those three, if you delivered internationally, you had to pay attention to which one you're in. If you were working entirely in the US, it was all NTSC, and everybody understood the technical standards in those early days. This is all kind of a little bit fallen apart because of the internet and digital delivery. They're not the same standards that there used to be, but that's why it was important to understand where you were delivering to and which television system they operated in so you could make your dubs correctly so they would work in their system.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I think the other thing to remember is CCAM and PAL came post World War II as Europe and the Asian market started to expand, whereas NTSC was officially established before World War II, but World War II kind of got in the way in terms of its rollout. So that was part of it. And of course, the Germans and the Europeans thought they could do better, and the Japanese thought they could do better, so they improved it. We almost ran into the same problem here as HDTV rolled out, because there are two different broadcast standards and still on the books for HDTV. Basically, North America and Europe are two different standards. Now, everyone's kind of thrown that out the door because anybody can. 4K is a standard now, 1080. So we're past that point, but true broadcast, over-the-air broadcast standards are different.
And one of the challenges for PAL is that the social networks mostly have just gone to 30. Like they had to they just picked a frame rate. And so Facebook and if you're doing live, at least Facebook and YouTube, I believe, are both 30 frames a second. And so that has pushed a lot of people to do 30 frame per second delivery. Now, if you upload a file, it will play back at the frame rate that you uploaded it as. And if you, I believe if you stream 24 or 25 into YouTube, you will get a 30 frame stream, but the VOD will eventually, I believe, become the frame rate that you stream to it. I believe that's the case. So it's a little bit, it's gotten more and more complicated. But when we go to high frame rate, we can throw it all away. Next question.
Colin McCahey in Dublin, Ireland says, any response from Blackmagic Design on the Ultimatte 12 8K supporting 4x4K individual inputs?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to test this to make sure. So here's what I think is happening here is that you have only control over one keyer, but you have a quad input. So you have 4 inputs coming in that are 4K. But you don't have 4 independent keyers that are running. So what it's designed for is that you would have a quad input for 8K, so 4 4K images. And I believe you can pull that key, and if you gave it 4 different images in the background, it would do it. So the answer is, I think, without testing it, I think it will work, but it will be clunky. The only way that you're going to have the real 4Ks or 3 4Ks is to buy the 4K Ultimatte. Which is, again, 4K Ultimates were with the controller head $15,000 a couple weeks ago. And they're now, you have a software control, which is going to be just as easy to use for most people. That 4K head, I think, is $2,500 or $2,495 or something like that. So it's still, you could buy 3 of these for half the price that you could buy literally 3 weeks ago that you could buy one, and make it run. So a lot of value coming in, but I don't think the 8K is what I thought it would be. So I think it's still, we're going to have to manage the slightly more cost there if we want to do that. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, and he says, for the new iOS 16 webcam feature, does Ventura, the operating system, support more than one iPhone? Could you use it and the new keynote functions with cameras to essentially switch a multicam show?
Given that Monterey supports more than one camera, I think not. I haven't tried it with the continuity camera, but I would be very surprised if they don't have multiple cameras multiple phones supported. But we haven't tested it yet. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. In a discussion about the use of sequencing and or playback in large concerts, it was said that it is difficult for a major band to put on a large show without it in this day and age. Do you agree or disagree?
It's used pretty heavily. I mean, playback is a big part of most large concerts. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, since a lot of the staging itself, they've gone to large LED walls to provide the backdrops for a lot of these shows, and it's pre-programmed in graphics that are synchronized to the music very tightly. You have to be running off SMPTE-driven playback, and the band has to stay on beat, and the drummer has to have a click track, and he's got to know when to start, or they've got to be able to adjust on the fly to put it back in sync with the band. And since the staging and the lighting and the set changes and the special effects, the fire pots and the, and all the Verilights, all the robo-controlled lighting is driven off the song and is much more effective when it's directly in sync with the beat and in sync with the song. And as the song changes timbre or something, the lighting goes down and changes. That used to be all controlled, manually by the lighting director, calling cues over headsets to the guys in the spotlights and the guys in the dimmer board. But now it's all handled by computer, and it's being driven off a SMPTE control track, makes it easy to control everything.
Talking to a couple folks, working on concerts, it's mostly controlled by the computer. There are places where they let it free run, and then there's still places where they put their hands back on the board and start to react because the artists aren't doing, the artists just, their nature is not to do it they don't want to click track. They don't want to be, they just want to flow. And so in certain parts, they all have to go back to manual and sometimes whole shows because the artist doesn't want to.
You hear the dreaded phrase, one more time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Bill.
I think I went to a concert back in the 90s, and it was a pretty big stadium show, and I happened to be in a seat, and I happened to have a pair of binoculars with me. I will never forget it. It was a pretty famous duo, and I will not mention who it was, but the keyboard player up front was very mobile and, performing. And I happened to be at an angle where I could see through the flats in the back. And there was this other guy with a keyboard with a little light over the top. And I was going, wait a second, he's playing everything I'm hearing. And sure enough, I saw a couple of times when the keyboardist in front, supposedly fronting the band, who was very famous, would be getting the audience clapping before the last notes rang out, and the notes still were played. So I realized that it was the guy backstage actually playing the parts for the performer up front to do his job, which is to be the focus of the thing. It's the star. So it's been happening for a long time. I don't think that happens all the time. And there are plenty of musicians who can play live and do a great job, but it's been a possibility for a long time.
I really think that that's why some of us really lean towards wanting to see more authentic or, acoustic, smaller shows, because the big show is so much not authentic, and it's just, and that's the nature of it. You have a lot of people paying a lot of money to be there. It's a $20 million night, and you want to make sure it all works. And so you do a bunch of things that tighten it up to make it a great show. But it's not, at some point you feel like, well, it's a great show, but it's not real. And I think that is, I think there's sensitivity growing about that, and it has been growing. And I think that's why some people love the kind of MTV Unplugged kind of approach to some of those things. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, sorry. The recent Taylor Hawkins tribute concert was a 6-hour event. CBS then aired a 1-hour special, and MTV aired a 2-hour special shortly afterwards. What's the secret to editing that much footage very quickly?
Go ahead, Courtney.
EVS is the secret, because they're recording everything into an EVS system, all the cameras, everything. And of course, the cut. They don't, when they're trimming down a show like that, you're not changing the coverage at all. You're eliminating songs. So the EVS operators, which is considered a giant TiVo, it's recording the whole concert. It's based on time of day, hour, minute, second, and it's synchronized to an atomic clock. So they're just, the EVS operators are dropping a marker at the introduction of a song to the end of the song, and anything in between that song and the next song, that's covered in another marker. And so they have these little chunks, and then when they go to trim it down, they know the length of each chunk. They know the length of each song, the length of each introduction to each song, and a creative director can make decisions. Okay, well, we got to cut the 6-hour down to 2-hour, and we've got a half an hour to do it because it airs. They're not going into an edit suite. They're saying, well, here are the 5 things that total up to 2 hours. Here are the things that can total up to 2 hours, and the computer can generate that for them. They generate a playlist. They just tick off which segments they want to use, and it assembles that play out in that order. and you can come pretty close to generating an on-time show or cutting an on-time show by eliminating certain songs. But you have to make creative decisions on which songs are the best songs, which songs got the best reaction from the audience, et cetera, and make those decisions fairly quickly. But you're not spending time in the edit suite. You're just eliminating, pushing stuff out the door. You know?
You good, Bill?
And there's team editing nowadays. I mean, if you're working off an EVS or something like that, you can have one editor assigned to the main show. You know, Tim, you're doing the big cut. Tina, you're doing the 1 hour. John, you're doing the 2 hour. And they can be working in parallel because they're working off the same network hard drive attached storage. And so it's really easy to have multiple people even doing pieces of the performance.
Now, they're not working off of the NAS, so but they are working in parallel. So that 1 hour, 2 hour full cut. The EVSs themselves all have their own drive systems, and they rarely share those those drive systems. Sometimes they can, but rarely does that happen because it's just too complicated, and they're doing everything in real time. A lot of times, one of the things that we use in this kind of area is what's called IP Director, which is by EBS. An IP Director is basically a very simple edit. There's no fades, there's no things, but you can cut inside of it, and you're getting that. And basically, the way the EVS works is that it's not you don't hit record. The EVS is always recording. When it's on, it's pulling in files. And so what you'll send it is, and it'll, usually it has enough drive space to hold, 8 hours or 24 hours, depending on the resolution. Like, was it 4K? Is it 2K? Whatever that is. So anyway, so the EVS is pulling all that in, and you're setting just in and out points in the database. I mean, that's how the EVS works. And a lot of times for things when they're getting shortened, they're getting all the cameras. Oftentimes, not on a big show, maybe not all the cameras, but a lot of cameras can come in at one time, or the ones that are important to cover over. So they'll be getting program, and to Courtney's point, you might shorten the program and everything else. But if you decide you want to change an angle, that can be done, in the EVS in IP Director, and they can start right after the show starts. So basically, the show starts, the EVS operator is just getting data and watching it and just stopping it every once in a while and making a change or cutting this out or that thing. So they can be working during the show on it, replaying it, so on and so forth, and then a couple minutes or a half an hour or whatever after the show, they have a finished product. It's a pretty like a lot of times when you see things on the East Coast, like Thanksgiving Live or something like that. They'll do a live version on the East Coast. That's why they call it Thanksgiving Live, but you don't see it live on the West Coast. And the West Coast version will be significantly different than the East Coast version. There might be 30 to 50 edits that are being done that are sometimes called out during it, but definitely right after the show, the producer or director or whoever that's paying attention will list, like, we got to go to this, we got to go to this, we got to change this camera angle, we got to change this, and they all go through it really quickly, and then they punch that back out, or sometimes play it straight out of the EVS to make that work. Like when you're looking at one of the other ones that I think is actually the most impressive is the highlights that happen from what just happened. Like literally when you're watching a football game, when they go to the commercial break, and you see these slow motion cutting with this other thing, that just happened 5 minutes ago. It's a pretty impressive thing. And EVS operators are, they're gold, because their ability to slam through that stuff is kind of amazing. Go ahead, Peter.
I just want to gain some clarity for my own edification, if nothing else. It sounds like what you're saying is whether they're in the control room or in another room, they're getting the live feed and essentially making a copy of it and editing on the fly, and then potentially post the live show, they're doing a fine tuning based upon what the director wants. Yeah,
they're getting, and the thing is, the EVS gets all those channels. The EVS has a unique thing, well, not totally unique, but what they kind of invented, and they've become the standard for most of it. There's other things that do it. There's the TriCast, the 3-play from New Tech. There is the Dreamcatcher from Everett's. There's M Replay from Softron for the Mac. Those are some of the other ones that do this, but none of them do it. There's two things. None of them do it quite as well as EVS. And a lot of it is that you have EVS operators that really understand what they're looking at. And they, trying to train them to use something else is challenging, and so, but they have the ability to edit and play back at the same time. So they're still recording when you're editing. They're still recording while you're playing. They're still, and so you can, like, a lot of times we use things to just time shift them. So we might time shift, like, for instance, on a football game, they may interview the coach, 5 minutes before the game or 10 minutes before the game, but then they cut it in, right at the very beginning to kind of feed into that whole system. And it feels, when you're watching it, it totally feels like it all happened in real time. But oftentimes, a lot of individual pieces can be manipulated to make it a better show. Bill, real quick.
That makes sense on the bigger things. I've been in circumstances, though, where we'd have, for example, a Terra deck with 4 cartridges and camera 1's being fed to all 4, camera 2's being fed to 4 more. And so in that case, you can pull cart 2, give it to editor C, and they have the material, and so they can work on a parallel project to everybody else.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
This timing is interesting, Alex, because Doug Ferguson's 3-play just died, which was, $30,000? And he's looking at the Dreamcatcher, which is $50,000. How much is the EVS system?
It depends on how you configure it. It's between 80 and 120, or 80 and 250. It's more expensive. The Dreamcatcher, I will say, I think is technically, I think the Dreamcatcher will do, for instance, what Doug needs it to do. The Dreamcatcher should be sufficient for that. I think organizations like Pac-12 and so on and so forth, they use the Dreamcatchers and they're very successful for sports replay. So I don't think that's the hard part between the Dreamcatcher and the EVS is operators. In every major city, there are a handful of EVS operators and sometimes a lot of EVS operators that are available in that city. Otherwise, you're flying them in to make that happen. And that's why, and the reason that someone like Pac-12 can do what they do, and if someone reminds me or puts it in the second hour suggestions, I'll see if we can't get a tour or something like that. They're not that far away from me. But they do REMI at a massive level. So they backhaul all the cameras. So they don't have to send this out everywhere. They have a little truck that basically pulls the cameras and sometimes the commentators and then sends them back to San Francisco. And then the base edit system is all there. And they do that. They don't do it for the tier 1, like the football games, but they do it for a lot of the tier 2, tier 3 sports. They bring it back. And I think they do a couple thousand shows, a couple thousand games a year, out of it at a not a high cost. It definitely is efficient. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. Do we know the native frame rate of Zoom? Any changes with ZoomIso?
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, that's a bit of a loaded question because the native frame rate for Zoom is whatever you're sending it for an individual person. It will try and get it as close to between 25 and 30 frames per second as possible. And yes, there is a change in ZoomIso because it's getting I can't decide if it's a different feed or a specialized feed for ZoomIso that it can get the native feeds that are coming through to the ZoomIso client. And then it uses the hardware on the M1, at least in the ZoomIso version 2, to do scaling and reframing so it can really retime things for you at that point.
And go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, what I'm seeing, if I flop over to just a mock meeting I just made up, I'm sending 30. It's bouncing around on a receive at 25 to 30, like Peter said. And then if I jump over to my Mac Mini running ZoomIso, you actually set the default frame rate and it goes up to 30. And I just did this in real time. So outputting NDI, if I say 2997, it sends 2997. And you'll notice how fast it's changing here and monitoring in real time. So these are 3 local, or they've gone up to the cloud, to Zoom's data centers and back down. And you can see that they're bouncing around between, some strange 29 and 30, like with decimals. So there you go.
Yeah, it does seem like it ranges between, I don't know what the frame rate is. It does seem like it ranges between 25 and about 33. Like it's that's when I watch something in the stats behind it. What comes out of ZoomIso, though, is locked to whatever you told it to be. Next question.
Texas says Michael Keaton in, I believe that's Dope Sick, beat Colin Firth in The Staircase for an Emmy. Did they get it right?
I don't think enough of us saw any of those things to know what the answer is. Next question.
Next question is Harshid Trivedi in Daytona Beach, Florida, here on the panel. What is Super Saturday for those new members of our community? What will they look forward to speaking about when we come back to this topic?
Super Saturday is something that a lot of people will come together to work on, and it's just a mixture of many of the shows that we've worked on and ideas. Last year there was music, there was concert. There was a concert, there was cooking, there was other discussions, there was and basically, it's probably the biggest, the most complex use of all the things that we've learned each year, between comms and production and live, all going out live. And so it goes over quite a few hours, and it's a fascinating thing to do. So pretty exciting. It really lets everybody kind of just stretch out and work on it. Go ahead, Peter.
Don't forget our Super Saturdays that included the building of projects.
Yeah.
Like the Playout B and the tally lights.
Yeah.
That was also part of Super Saturday. Those were the most fascinating things for me, actually, to be honest with you. But I think that's the engineer in me.
Yeah, but it jumps between all those things, and so it's one thing after another. It's hour after hour is a different, or sometimes different time frames. It's different things that we're going to jump to. So it's entire whole shows that are complex and very high quality, but jumping between each one of them. And so and it's a great test of what we're doing and what we're learning. So we'll have the 1000th episode a couple days later, but it will be much simpler than Super Saturday. So because we'll partially because we'll simplify the 1000th show because I think that we can't do both of them 2 days apart, too complicated. So we'll keep that one pretty much a retrospective and not make it quite as complicated as Super Saturday will be, I'm sure. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas wonders who's getting an iPhone 14, Apple Watch, or iPad from Apple on Friday or thereafter, and what are they getting?
Good, Peter.
So I'm getting the iPhone 14 Pro at 512 gigabytes coming in. Now, I find this fascinating because Apple says it's preparing to ship, but UPS, because it knows my address, says the package is in Alaska right now as we speak.
Yeah. Mine said it shipped already, but it said it's still going to come on the 16th. So we'll see. Bill.
For those of you curious what happens when you are distracted and wait, I didn't order mine until about 4:00 on Friday when they released them, and I am set to get mine on October 14th, I believe. So they obviously sold a lot and pushed the delivery date back. Now, often last year when something like that happened, I got it in about 2/3 of the time they promised. So they are usually pretty quick, but a lot of them must have been ordered.
Yeah, a lot of them ordered. How many made, we don't know. But for a lot of us, especially because I have to talk about it on a show, that's why a lot of us were sitting there at 5 a.m. tapping on the screen to make sure that we get them so that we can talk about them and that we don't have to wait. It's just one of those things. So it's a simple process. But I've skipped it for a couple of days and then I wait for months. So I've learned my lesson. I still think that Apple should just say we have 4 phones coming out next week, and you can just pick the one you want and do that before they do the announcement, just to see what would happen. There's the pre-order where you can actually pre-order what you're doing, and there's no refunds, there's no exchanges. You just have to do it straight into. And there's a bunch of us that just make our life easier. If we all knew we were going to get them the next couple of days. So I bet you they would sell a lot. More than most phones, just before they even told us what it was. Next question.
Kenneth Jones, Seattle, Washington, up next. Given new Apple hardware and the new iOS release, which early adopters do you watch to learn about pitfalls before you switch to the newer things?
Good, Courtney.
I like Marcus Brownlee and KP. He does fairly honest reviews, and since he's a behemoth in the influencer market, he gets a lot of stuff ahead of time and has a chance to test them, but he will not put out a review until it's released to the public and he's used it for a period of time. And so I think he gives some really honest reviews. You got to watch out for some of the fanboy sites because, especially in Apple world, they may just be so enraptured with the marketing materials for that particular product, they'll overlook the flaws because they don't want to put it in a bad light. So I look for a good critical review that can point out the great new features plus any flaws that need to be fixed or that may be a problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm Marcus Brownlee. I also like to look at, how iJustine looks at, shows stuff. I usually like to look at the breakdown that Brene Ritchie does. He's usually very to the point about, what those things are and really talks through the technical errors, or area, not errors, but areas. Those are the people that I kind of track, for most of those things. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, there's also track record. Apple has had a pretty good track record of releasing solid products. They occasionally have missteps, no question about it. They will ship a piece of software or a phone, and they will have something that they have to go back and tweak a little bit later. They usually get to those pretty quickly. But after this many years of delivering really good quality things, I'm pretty willing to pull the trigger pretty soon if it's an Apple flagship program or product, because I know their reputation really matters to them. And I haven't been snapped too much on that in the past, so I feel pretty confident about it.
Yeah, you're holding it wrong, Bill.
Yeah, I'm saying they have made missteps in the past, and
I thought that was
one of them.
I thought that was the best feature they had in a lot of phones, because the problem is if you didn't want to talk to someone any longer, if you hang up on them, it tells them that you hung up on them. But if you just held your phone the wrong way, it would drop the call, and then you quickly turn it to private, and then it was just off. And then it's just like, oh, I'm sorry, I lost battery.
So what was that, iPhone 8 or something? That was like forever ago, and it's still top of mind.
I just put my fingers right on
iPhone 4.
The antennas, I can be the outside buzzing. Yeah,
I can be freed of this call. So anyway.
So we're at 14. So anyway. It was 10 phones ago.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I buy things right out of the gate, mostly because I have to talk about them on a show. But otherwise, I tend to wait a little bit. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. After moving from the suburban area, I grew up to a rural area. I've had to become accustomed to longer distances between destinations. Can you see services like Uber delivery expanding their coverage as autonomous driving becomes commonplace?
Yeah, I think that's their hope, is to expand what they're doing with autonomous driving. It still could take a little while. Go ahead, Bill.
I had a friend once, and it was a young couple, and their gig before had been they lived out in a rural area, and they were contracted with, I can't remember whether it was UPS or FedEx, one of them, but they took the really weird, when they had to drive 4 hours to get to somebody's place, and there was constant work on it. But, there's just not a large crew. So people at the end of those rural areas sometimes had to wait an extra 2 or 3 days for a delivery, because Rod and Erica, were scheduling things. They could only make this 130-mile trip to some really weird remote outpost occasionally. So you're not getting same-day service in some really remote areas, just a fact of life.
Go ahead, Bill. Or Courtney.
I kind of doubt it, because those autonomous driving cars are fairly expensive to create. And if you're not hauling a paying passenger, hauling, just little packages, may not return a good profit for them. They may just keep that farmed out to the individual people that need jobs and drive their personal cars, because that's what Amazon does. You can sign up to be an Amazon package deliverer and pick up packages and deliver them yourself once you're vetted. So you're not driving an Amazon truck, you're driving your own car. And there's lots of people out there that earn an extra living doing that. So using autonomous driving to do that, I think it won't be until the price of an autonomous car comes down. I don't think they're going to be using it very much for package delivery.
Good guy.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about going to something like CES, where you see a peek into the future, and they had these mobile shoe stores. Essentially, they would just drive up out front of your house, and you could try on the different shoes in a little vehicle that would pull up front, and then the ones that you wanted to keep, you paid for, and it would just go on to the next place. The other thing that we're seeing up here in Seattle is Amazon drone services. So that's a very, very, very real thing. I was talking to one of my coworkers at an event last week, and she was like, "Oh yeah, my significant other's working on that project." So it's very real. It's coming. So you'll probably see that as more of a thing, the drones delivering to the outside areas.
So an aerial taxi delivers a Starbucks store right to your front yard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I do hear that the drone for meals are going to make more sense in a lot of ways than that, eventually. But then people learn to shoot the drones down and eat and get the meal. It's like hunting, but just for Starbucks sandwiches. But I think it'll be interesting. I do think that the drone stuff is really interesting, and I think that they've been working on that now for, I think, almost a decade. Like it's been in development for a long time, and obviously they want to make it right. But I think, and in Rwanda, they're delivering blood to rural areas. For infusions. They're delivering blood to different areas via drone right now. But the hardest part is, how do you hand it effectively to the consumer? When you're doing it from one person, from a technical facility to another, it's pretty straightforward. When you're doing it, what does the consumer do, and how do you keep them away from the moving parts? And do you drop it and then leave and then tell them? And, all those things I think become complicated. And then that and power lines. Next question.
Santa Bart Gaffney in Oconomowoc. Final Cut Pro or Premiere? Which platform to adopt if you are starting from scratch?
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I have to admit, since she brings up Final Cut Pro versus Premiere, she must be on the Mac ecosystem.
It's a Santa.
It's one
of the Santas. It's a he.
It's a he. Oh, sorry. I read it. Santa. Oh, sorry. Should be wearing my glasses, but I don't. Yeah. I started off with Final Cut, but they're forgetting the I will say the new kid on the block for all of us on the show is, ever since I've gotten my 6K Pro, I've moved over to DaVinci and found I can do as much, if not more, doing my editing in DaVinci that I could in Final Cut Pro.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I started off on Premiere 100 years ago, and I moved over to DaVinci from Premiere after many, many years. If I was going to start over again, I'd go to Final Cut, but I would suggest learning them all. Learn them. I have all of them above. So,
yeah, go ahead, Bill.
What's your goal? You want a seat in somebody else's shop? You probably should learn Premiere. If you want to do your own work, you should probably be on Final Cut, because it's incredibly fast if you learn to be good at it. That is not diminishing Resolve at all. Resolve is a more modern version of track-based editing, which has been dominant for 40 years now in the edit world. So it really depends on who you are and what you need to get accomplished. That's my read.
Yeah, I think that I think Bill's got a good read on it. If you're trying to, the most popular one that you're going to get an entry-level job in is Premiere, most likely, right now. If you're doing if you're on a PC and you want to get something for free and start to learn it, Resolve is free for the base version, and it will do a lot for free. And it's a very technical app. It's a little heavier to learn, to get into what you're doing there than some of the other ones. I think that, in my opinion, Final Cut's still the fastest one to edit. So if I'm doing a basic stereo, I'm going to cut a bunch of stuff together and I need it to work and I want to just get through it. I find that Final Cut's just a lot faster, and the integration with motion is really powerful, and there's a lot of bits and pieces there that are really useful for me. And it's probably still my go-to. If I'm in the field cutting things that I want to put up, like at a conference or something like that, I tend to use Final Cut for that. When I do highly technical shows, when I'm doing where I have HDR, I have more than stereo, I have, those types of things, I tend to go into Resolve for those, because I feel like Final Cut got ahead, especially in surround. I find it ironic that Apple is pushing so much around surround. It feels like about a decade ago, Apple threw a bunch of stuff in like 5.1 and everything else, and then they just stopped. That team moved on to something else, and we haven't seen any updates. And it makes dealing with surround specifically in Final Cut to be very difficult, and you end up just going, because you don't know what you're getting. You just don't know what's coming out, and you have very little control over it. And so that, I think that's a big need for them to fix. Go ahead, Peter.
About 10 years ago, I moved from iMovie to Final Cut Pro. So that was the easy part. And what I tend to do now is if I'm doing something more complicated in terms of editing and coming in from the 6K Pro, I do all the heavy-handed work inside inside DaVinci,
Mhm.
and then output a 4K master and bring that back into Final Cut and do the fine tuning of what I need to do. Put the titles in, run it through motion, put the motion graphics in, things like that, so that I can, because I still can do all that in Final Cut, but all the heavy lifting has to be done up because I have to get it from 6K to 4K somehow, to be quite honest.
I do think one of the genius things about that Blackmagic did, and I don't think it's a genius thing. I think that they just did it because they don't want to work on it, and Apple doesn't want to work on it. But the fact that you really have to open Resolve to deal with Blackmagic Raw to get it into Final Cut means that every person that wants to use a Blackmagic camera with Final Cut is learning Resolve, which I feel like I know Apple doesn't want to. I don't think Apple wants to build that, but it's a big problem for them because they're literally training everybody to use Resolve by not supporting the Blackmagic RAW format. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael again. 2 days ago, Roland bought Drum Workshop, well-known acoustic drum manufacturer. Could you see the risk of Roland losing their focus on hardware and, more importantly, software development for their electronic instruments?
Go ahead, Courtney.
No, they're diversifying. That's a good business decision. A lot of, if they're specifically, Roland has been in the recorder and electronic instrument market for a long time, and they're branching out. They want to cover more of, they're in the same genre, musical instruments, and if they cover drum hardware for live events, even if a lot of drummers are switching over to electronic drums or loop type drumming stuff used in recording studios, there's still going to be live performances. And this way, Roland gets to keep their foot in the door for musical performance for tours and things like that. So, and it gives them a better way to integrate their software and electronic instruments with actual hardware instruments. So, I see it as a win-win and diversification. I don't think it's going to take any of their focus off their electronic instrument line.
Next question.
Colin McKay here in Dublin, Ireland, is back again, shooting first video podcast and looking at overhead and or boom mics. Any suggestions on the choice of mic or different approaches?
Yeah, what I will say is that I really like underslung mics for video podcasts. So you can do it any way you want when you're doing an audio podcast. When you're doing a video podcast, the most popular one when I see it, high end video things are these OC Whites, the Ultimas. But the Elgato is fine. Like I have one. We've got a couple in the office. The Elgato has a little less dexterity than the OC White, but it's at 1/3 the cost. So, but an underslung arm makes a big difference in that area. And then the two mics that we see the most in these, the three are the RE20, the SMB7, is that right? And the Heil PR40. Those are the three that between those three, I would say that's like 95% of what I've seen. And the SMB7 is it SMB7? I think it is. SMB7 is probably 60-70%. Heil being the next 30% or so, and then a small amount with RE20s, and then I almost never see anything else. Go ahead, Bill.
So you specifically mentioned overhead and boom mics, and there's a couple of things to think about if you're looking to buy a microphone for that kind of purpose, particularly if you're going to have.
And we have to go pretty close. I have to end at 9, so we've got a couple. We got 3 more questions, so I'll just cut. So real quick.
Hypercardioid shotgun, also. So
you don't want to do that. I'm sorry, I don't have time to beat around the bush. You have to have, if you're going to have a bunch of people sitting around a podcast, they have to have a high off-axis rejection. So shotguns will pick up too much of the room. If you're looking at mics that are going to go all the way around, if you're going to send them out, it can be a lot of different things, but it has to be a high, almost always dynamic, or the RE there. But I'm sorry, this is something that I build a lot of podcast rooms, and so the shotgun is not going to work. And sorry, I'm kind of cutting through these.
So you're saying desk mount, not actually an overhead boom mic.
I would never do that for a video podcast because then the arms are in the way. Like you have to have I mean,
the boom poles in the way.
Oh, and then you have a boom with a shotgun with 5 people sitting around would be a disaster for a podcast. Like you will get so much crosstalk.
I guess I'm confused. I don't see 5 people. I see just video podcast looking at overhead boom mics. That's what he's specifying, and looking for a choice of mics, which would be a hypercardia,
I
like a
misread
Sheps.
I misread it, but I would never do that.
MKH 416. Not for a group. I agree with Alex. If you got 5 people on a table, this is the wrong solution. I'm saying one person at a desk with an overhead boom works great.
Yeah, you're right. I apologize.
Just make sure that if you use a shotgun, the back lobe isn't pointed at an air conditioning duct or something like that. That can give you.
I apologize. I'm just trying to move through quickly. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I was going to point out the same thing. 416, Sennheiser 416, a whole lot of podcasters that are just single people that are presenting to their camera and back of a desk. They're presenting, influencers, things like that. Not discussion type podcasts, but presentation type podcasts. 416 or the NT3, the Rode hypercardioid is a good choice. Just get it just slightly out of frame above their heads and make sure there's nothing making noise directly in line with.
And as someone who has to edit stuff with boom mics, I for podcasts, I don't. The reason I just jumped on it really quickly is that they're kind of a nightmare for me. Like we just really try to have people not use those. They just pick up so much of the room and fans and all kinds of other things in a way that an off-axis, I would think about restructuring that a little bit because they're really a nightmare to work with for podcasts specifically. For a lot of things, they're perfect. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, would the DJI Mini 3 Pro be a solid first drone to start with? What's appealing is the 249-gram weight, which doesn't require registration.
There are so many restrictions to using a drone now. I don't know if requiring or not requiring registration really means as much as it used to. So, I don't know if it is a really cool, it's a really cool drone. If you want to play with it, it's great. It's got a much better sensor, but I don't think avoiding registration is as big of a deal as it used to be because there's so many drone restrictions in general. You don't get that much out of that. Go ahead, Courtney, real quick.
Avoiding registration is great. It allows you to fly in a lot more situations without the fear of harming someone. If it does fall out of the sky onto someone at 250 grams, it's not going to do much damage to anything or anybody.
Yeah, and protecting the blades, if you can get a blade protector, I think that there is one for that specific one. And then you can do indoor stuff like architecture.
Yeah, but it puts it over 250 grams, so then you lose your licensing escape.
Right. Next question.
Svetlana in Belarus, Minsk says, regarding methods companies apply for downsizing their staff and recalling aggressive reduction of labor force at France Telecom, how many organizations in the process of restructuring come up to this method of making test cases that don't go public?
Good, Bill.
I've been involved in 2 quick big company restructurings. It's a formal process because they're worried about people getting into lawsuits. I've gone through processes with big companies where they look at each job individually. I think there's less and less of that. It's just getting tough, but you've still got to watch out for the regulation stuff.
Good. Peter?
Company went through a series of massive restructurings. And I think it depends by the country and by the state, to be honest with you, because labor laws vary. And I remember, I'll just simply say back when IBM did its first major layoff back in the late 80s, it caught everyone off by surprise because they had been exempted from paying payroll tax to the state of New York.
Right.
Because they had a zero layoff policy, and then they suddenly laid everyone off, and all of a sudden, where's the unemployment?
Yeah, and a lot of times the large corporations tend to accumulate fat. And I hate to say it that way, but they hire more people than they needed because they don't want to be under-resourced, and every once in a while they have to correct that. They just bring in more people than they needed, and a lot of times there's not enough managers for it. There's not enough movement. There's not enough productivity. There's not enough things, and so they tend to first overhire, and then they. And some companies use it as a business model. So that they're going to overhire, they're going to resource up, and then they're going to get rid of the slower movers and then move on. And sometimes they just realize they went the wrong direction, and they have to even take a lot of people out that are very good. So it's not always the people who aren't as good. It's sometimes the company a new executive comes in for that division and just goes, "What are we doing here? Why are we doing this?" And they're not interested in being accountable for something that they didn't start. And then suddenly it can be 10,000 people aren't there anymore because they didn't want to because a new executive came in and didn't think it was a good idea. And we saw this happening in real time at HBO. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, if you're coming from a 15-inch 2017 MacBook Pro quad-core, would you go with an M2 MacBook Air or a 14-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro? Both would have an outboard monitor.
Go, Peter.
That my neighbor is quite happy with their Air because all they really do is mail and surf the web with it. I would not be, because the Air has thermal limitations, and it will go into thermal slowdown if you're running it more than 30 minutes trying to do any video editing, things like that. So it really depends. What is your use case?
Yeah, and I will say that I'd probably wait for an update. I'm not super excited about the laptops, like for production. I think they're great for a lot of folks, but I think that these laptops are a little in between. They didn't redesign. I think the Air is, doesn't have the fan it needs, and the MacBook Pro wasn't a new design for the shell, and I think that it's limited by that. And I'd wait until I saw something move a little bit there before I bought a laptop if I didn't have to right now. The Mac Minis hit a home run. The laptops, I think, hit a single. Like they're better. They didn't strike out, but they didn't hit a home run, I think. So that's the thing to consider. All right. We covered the Tlaloc traversal. We need a graphic for this. Anyway, Tlaloc traversal is 87,000 miles, 140,000 kilometers. So we covered a lot of. We didn't quite get to 1K, but we're getting there. Pretty good set of miles there. So well done. Thanks to the producers for all your great questions. Thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. Great conversation. And thanks to the team working hard on the back end, making this all work. Appreciate all of you. All right. We are going to a reminder that today is Ken Jordan will be talking about web development. So he'll be in after hours in a breakout room. So stay tuned for that. I think Elle is back. I believe Elle is back to the regular schedule. And a reminder, we're still doing the ISO tests 1 to 3 this week, but starting next week, we'll be moving to 10 to noon to do the ISO tests. All right. We'll see you in after hours.
And Ked's agreed to come on the show tomorrow for our discussion. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Ken is back. His camera will look better than all of ours. Sound good.
He will look better than all of us.
He'll look better.